Hello and welcome to the Coming Dawn podcast.
This is Josiah.
And this is Caleb.
And we are finally back with another series called The Almighty.
In this series, we're going to be talking about our Heavenly Father, aspects of Him, and His sovereignty in both our lives, our salvation, and in prophecy.
Yep, we're going to be talking about His nature and His character, and we have quite a few things that we want to introduce before we really jump into the scriptures. We're going to be going basically in order. We're going to be surveying through the whole scriptures about the nature of the Father, His character, and how He relates to us in time. And so I'm really looking forward to getting into this, and we're going to be finding out some amazing stuff about His eternal purpose for us.
And as with any story, we're going to start at the very beginning, Genesis 1:1.
Yep, we're going to be starting in Genesis 1:1. We're going to be using the New King James Version. This is going to be from the Word of Promise. If you guys have been keeping up with us, you know we use this app. It's really good. Highly recommend it. And so we're going to be starting there. And here we go.
In the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth.
And so here we have Genesis 1:1. In the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. So one of the first things we know in this introduction about God is that in the beginning, He was already there. He was in the beginning before everything, before time itself. So that really indicates something about His character and His nature, so to speak. We can see God being the creator of all things, the heavens and the earth. So now you might be wondering, what does this mean? Well, this means that, as we're going to see in lots of other scriptures, that God is eternal. He is from everlasting to everlasting. And so whenever He created, we must know that He created with a purpose. He created the heavens and the earth with something in mind, a purpose in mind. There's a reason why He made the heavens and the earth the way they were.
And it wasn't done on a whim or some sort of spur of the moment decision or lightly thought out thing. All time itself was planned from the beginning, that He had made plans for us and He had made plans for His creation and how He was going to involve Himself with it. And we're going to break that down here in a sec.
Yeah, we see here, a lot of people might be wondering, well, could there have been many gods, like, in Hinduism or Buddhism or something like that had helped in the creation or anything like that? Well, there are many scriptures that say that is not the case. And if you guys have watched our first video on this series called the It Is Written Guides, you would know that the Bible is definitely something that can be trusted because of the nature of the prophecies that were in it. Mm-hmm. And the Bible tells us that there really was no other God. And actually in Isaiah chapter 41, if you guys want to follow us in there, we find God talking about the futility of idols. I will let the Lord speak for Himself here.
And this will be in verse 21.
Starting in verse 21 through 24 here.
Present your case, says the Lord. Bring forth your strong reasons, says the King of Jacob. Let them bring forth and show us what will happen. Let them show the former things what they were, that we may consider them and know the latter end of them. Or declare to us things to come. Show the things that are to come hereafter, that we may know that you are gods. Yes, do good or do evil, that we may be dismayed and see it together. Indeed, you are nothing, and your work is nothing. He who chooses you is an abomination.
So here we have God presenting the case for Himself in light of the false gods that are out there. And one of the things that He is doing, one of the reasons why I bring this text up, is because we find here what God is actually able to do in light of what these idols are not able to do. In other words, we find here that God is telling them and telling other gods, hey, show us what will happen. In other words, He's saying, if you know everything, tell us the future. If you know everything, if you are really divine, tell us the future, because no created being would be able to really tell anybody the future. We mentioned this in the first video on the why that we should believe the scriptures. Can God be trusted? Can the scriptures be trusted? Here we have God saying to them, show us what will happen. And then he also says something very interesting. Right after he says, show us what will happen, he also says, let them show the former things, what they were, that we may consider them and know the latter end of them. In other words, God is saying and telling us, tell us what had happened in the past, but also tell us why it happened. In other words, you could be an eyewitness to an event and not know why it happened, but God can tell us what had happened in the past, not only what can happen or what is going to happen in the future for certain, but he also tells us what happened in the past and why it happened. Why? Because he has a purpose. He has a decree.
Yes, and he also is the Alpha and the Omega. It is described in the Bible. He is the beginning and the end. He is outside time itself. As a matter of fact, he's decreed time. And so he's challenged creation in this because mankind and man's, idea of their own creations as being gods, are not able to interpret such things or to be able to depict things that will happen or were happened or why they happened because they aren't outside of time. They aren't eternity itself.
Yeah, and even historians, which can, with varying levels of accuracy, tell you accurately what happened in the past, especially the very recent past. But very rarely will you really know for certain why things happen the way they are. And God can tell us that, because he has a purpose, because we can definitely trust him, because he has accurately told us the future. The things that we can look back on and think, wow, no one could have ever foretold these things. For example, the rise and fall of nations. We discussed this before, and how no one else could have really predicted or foretold that. And so we'll go to another particular text in Isaiah 46, and this is where it really comes out. In Isaiah 46, verse 8 through 11, we're going to play it here, and we see God doing something and telling us something very interesting about himself and what he actually does with time itself and everything that takes place in time. This is what he says in starting in verse 8.
Remember this, and show yourselves men. Recall to mind, O you transgressors, remember the former things of old. For I am God, and there is no other. I am God, and there is none like me, declaring the end from the beginning, and from ancient times, things that are not yet done, saying, my counsel shall stand, and I will do all my pleasure, calling a bird of prey from the east, the man who executes my counsel from a far country. Indeed, I have spoken it. I will also bring it to pass. I have purposed it. I will also do it.
All right. So here we find people saying, well, yeah, God knows all things. I mean, it's obvious that he knows, he's omniscient, right? He knows all things. He has perfect knowledge of all things. And, that means, that God is looking outside and looking at time and thinking, this is very interesting. It's very interesting that all happens. That God isn't really making anything happen, but he's just kind of looking outside, and kind of
he's passively allowing things this is often described as looking down the window of time and allowing things to happen and allowing for things to make their own choices. But this right here talks about God declaring the end from the beginning, and from ancient times things that are not yet done. He has declared the future. He has declared the past, and he does things because it's his own pleasure. That's what it means to be a sovereign ruler. That's what it means to be almighty.
And a lot of people think, well, how can God do this and be good? I mean, and we're going to find also in the scriptures, we're going to find the character of God and how he is love. And we see here that God is saying, hey, look, yes, I'm declaring the end from the beginning. And people will say, well, yeah, he can declare, but it's not like he's, controlling. And you could kind of make a case for the idea that, well, he's not really making people do evil, because obviously God is holy. Because he is holy, he has to be separate from all evil and sin and suffering and things like that. But what we see God doing here is he is saying, look, my counsel shall stand. In other words, I have a purpose in creating the heavens and the earth, knowing what is going to happen, all is going to happen in the universe that I am creating. In other words, I have a purpose for declaring the end from the beginning, everything that happens in time. And he particularly says this, we see this when he says, my counsel shall stand, and I will do all my pleasure. And we also see this when he says in verse 11, we say, calling a bird of prey from the east, the man who executes my counsel. This is, and really what he's speaking of in particular in this prophecy is King Cyrus. And he is saying, look, I have spoken it, but I will also bring it to pass. In other words, you say God has nothing to do with it, but he just knows it. But no, God is saying, look, I will also bring it to pass because I have purposed it, and I will also do it. And so that means that God is intimately involved in what is happening in time and everything that happens in time. And, because Cyrus, it could be said that, we would ask the question, did he really have a choice in the autonomous sense? Because we can look back at that time and be like, Cyrus, man, are you going to do this, or are you not going to do this? And Cyrus can say, well, yeah, I choose to do this. And we can say that Cyrus, he had free will in time. We could say at that time he knew, he felt like, freeing the Israelites and everything. And he said, well, yeah, I'm going to free the Israelites because of X, Y, and Z, and therefore I choose to do this in regards and to not to do this. But what we find here, though, is God saying, look, I have declared this already. I have declared this already because my counsel shall stand. In other words, I have purposed this to happen. I have not only foretold that this would happen, I had created, because I've created the heavens and the earth and arranged everything so that everything would go in this direction. I have purposed this. In other words, I have already, knowing what is going to happen, I have already pretty much counseled and decreed what Cyrus was going to do. In other words, in time, it looks like you can say, you could look at Cyrus had a choice from his perspective, but from God's perspective, he really didn't have a choice in the autonomous libertarian sense. Autonomous, by the way, means self-law. It comes from the Latin words autos means self and nomos, which means law. It's like, it literally means a law unto oneself, something that can act separate. We say that the heart is an autonomic system, because it can act by itself, it can beat by itself. We all know God making our hearts beat, so it's not really autonomous in the complete sense. Same with the autonomic nervous system. Our nervous system acts by itself in response to certain stimuli. Well, God also created that, so it's not truly autonomous. In other words, there's nothing in this universe that acts separate by itself apart from God's decree in his foreknowledge of all things. And so with that as our foundation, we can begin to go further into the scriptures and find out how this all works and find out why God have purposed everything the way the things should be. And we're going to find out how God is love and his character, and how this shows how great God is and everything of that nature. Because it is truly amazing what we're going to discover in the God of eternity. And so this is what the introduction will be. Next time we're going to dive into Genesis 3:15. We're going to dive into the fall and basically work our way from there.
Also hit a little bit of Romans, a little bit of John, and talk a little bit about the seed of the Father and the seed of Lucifer. So we hope you enjoyed this journey with us, and as we travel on the discussion of the Almighty and the love that he has and that he shares for us, I'm really excited. I know Josiah is, and we hope you tune in next time on episode 2 of the Almighty.
Thank you all for listening.
Once again, my name is Caleb.
And this is Josiah. and God bless.